Let's start here then with Sukoian, who is a vampire from Caribbean legends and fits into a class of creatures they call Yumbi or Jumbi, which is basically a word for mythological spirit or demon. Well, Sukoian normally during the day takes the form of an old lady who lives alone in some house or secluded place. But during the night or at dusk, she starts to take off all her skin and then reveals her true form, which is some golden balls floating in the air. She then stores her skin in a mortar and goes out to look for a snack. She enters houses through cracks or holes in keyholes, then starts to suck people's blood while they sleep. And when morning comes, those people who are attacked notice that they have black and blue marks on their bodies and also feel very weak. But there are ways to protect yourself from this creature. One of them is to take several grains of rice, a lot of rice, and place them near the house or at crossroads. Because this creature, when it sees rice on the ground, it tends to count the grains of rice. And it might take a long time, so it could end up being morning, and then it will die. Or you can find where its skin is hidden, throw salt on it, and then it won't be able to put it back on, and will also be killed by the sun. I thought this legend was okay. Kind of cool, but nothing special. Also, they say vampires hunt people who don't like or subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and do that, and consider becoming a channel member. It's less than 5 Rs, it helps me out a ton, and you get early access to the videos, and also to exclusive videos, like those currently on the screen. Another way you can contribute to the channel is by buying the products that are showing up on the screen right now, like this PlayStation 5, and some books I'll put up there too. And there will also be products in the pinned comment. Just by clicking on the links, you'll already be helping me a lot. Well, now we're going to talk about Briar, who is a vampire from Lowell, and she's actually pretty new compared to another vampire from Lowell who will also be on this list. Well, Briar was created as an extremely deadly machine by the Black Rose, which is an evil organization in that world, but she ended up becoming a problem because her thirst for blood, for killing, was so insatiable that she became uncontrollable, and this caused the missions she was sent on to fail. So they had to imprison her, and besides that, they put a pillory on her, which is kind of like a metal device they put on her like this, so she stayed like this. And it even showed up in those Western movies, which you guys have probably seen. And this pillory was made of magical runes, which controlled her mind and gave her a certain clarity. This clarity was so strong that even Briar liked it, because with it, she was able to think straight and do other things, besides just trying to kill people. And she managed to break free from that prison, but she kept the pillory and went out looking to make new friends, meeting new people, exploring her nature beyond just being an assassin. But of course, every now and then she still loses control. I liked Briar, okay? Because it kind of mixes the idea of the wild vampire with the vampire we have nowadays, which is that more handsome vampire, the one who has self-control, who even becomes a hero sometimes. And now let's talk about Adzi, which is pretty similar but not quite the same as the Sukoian legend from the Caribbean that I told you about. Because in this case, Sukoian would turn into a golden ball and fly around, entering people's houses. But Adzi, which is a legend from Ghanaian from the Tobo, turns into a firefly and does pretty much the same thing. He looks for an open window, a crack, a hole in the wall, enters the house, and attacks his victims. And he's kind of like a boogeyman too, because he prefers children. And besides sucking the blood of his victims, he also spreads diseases everywhere he goes. But the difference between the legend of Sukoian and Adzi is also in the way you can deal with the creature. Because in the case of Adzi, there's no way to deal with it. Because if you find it and confront it, it will transform into its human form, which is really scary. It will possess you and will probably turn you into a witch, and you will destroy your whole family or your entire community. The only way to deal with Adzi is to close the window, close the door, close all the openings in your house, and pray that it doesn't want to come in. Because otherwise, there's nothing you can do. That's why I'll keep it as badass, since this creature is nearly unstoppable, right? And now let's move on to Skinner's Witch, which is a creation by both Scott Snyder and Stephen King, and he's the American vampire. He was an outlaw in the Old West back in the 1880s who ended up facing some European vampires, but in the process, he ended up getting infected and was buried alive. But then, because he had a genetic mutation and was also created there on American soil, he ended up becoming a new species of vampire, the American vampire. The difference between him and the classic vampires is basically the fact that he's a daywalker. In other words, he can walk in the sunlight, while the other vampires would die in that case. Actually, Skinner even ends up getting stronger in the sun. He has long claws and kind of shark-like teeth. He goes through several eras in history, like World War II and also the Golden Age of Hollywood, always being the anti-hero. And his only weakness is gold. Man, in my opinion, Skinner is awesome, okay? That's just my take. Well, Penanggalan, which is the next one we're going to talk about here, is a legend from Southeast Asia, more specifically from Malaysia. The start of the Penanggalan legend is much like others I've shared here. For example, it kind of walks around in the form of a woman during the day, but at night, that's when the creature stands out, because its form is completely different from the others. It simply removes the upper part of its body and goes flying around with its exposed guts and everything. It goes after its victims, mainly pregnant women and newborns. It always comes in through the window. So one way to protect yourself from Penanggalan is to put up some kind of net, a fence, barbed wire, or even thorny plants, because his guts are exposed, right? So when he passes by, his guts might get stuck, and then he's in trouble. Another way to get rid of this creature is to find the rest of his body that's lying around, or even put thorns or glass on that body. When he tries to reattach himself, he'll get badly hurt and die. This legend is very unique, which I think is cool. Next is from DC's comic Preacher, featuring Cassidy. He's the guy who ended up becoming a vampire after being attacked in the swamp by a strange creature during the Easter Rising in 1916. Since then, he's been wandering through various places, mainly swamps in the United States. And he lives in excess, always drinking and running away from his friends so he doesn't have to see them grow old. He's a very down-to-earth vampire, okay? He doesn't look anything like Dracula, for example. Like, he wears sunglasses to hide his eyes, which are red because of the blood. And he has no problem with crosses, holy symbols, or garlic. None of that. He's not a stereotypical vampire at all. And apparently, from what I've seen, he's really a down-to-earth vampire. His problem is more with himself, in his own mind, you know? He's always self-destructing. That said, I'm going to put him in the so-so category. Maranangal is actually pretty similar at the beginning of the legend to the Malaysian legend I told you about, the vampire that splits itself in half, right? Because he does the same thing too. But unlike Penanggalan, Maranangal has a tongue that he uses to get through keyholes, or holes in the roof, holes in the wall, and then he can suck the blood of his victims. And one way to stop this creature and get rid of it is by finding the lower part of the body that he separated from and throwing salt on it, because then this creature can't become whole again and will die when the sun rises. I might rate it awesome, but since I think the similar creature is cooler, I'll leave this one as okay. Now moving on to Vampire Batman, just because he's Batman, I'm already going to put him in awesome, okay? And I didn't even know this Batman existed. Apparently in this version, Bruce ends up fighting against Count Dracula's own clan, and to be able to defeat him, he ends up being bitten by a vampire and gaining vampire powers. But then there's the problem, right? He's a vampire, right? He starts having blood cravings. He starts fighting against his own instincts. But then Alfred ends up dying, and so does Joker. Then he completely loses his sanity and starts killing his own villains. It's really awesome. There's nothing else to say. And next up is the Vrikolakas, which is a vampire from Greece. And in this case, I'm not exactly sure if it would be a vampire, because it kind of combines the idea of a vampire with a werewolf. Because in this case, to become a Vrikolakas, you would have to die in sin, live a completely unruly life, or eat the meat of an animal that was killed by a wolf. That's why it also has to do with werewolves. And then you would end up taking on kind of a corpse-like form, and then your body would start swelling, your skin would get completely stretched, and you would go around walking, knocking on doors at night, shouting the names of the residents. And if someone answers or opens the door, that person will die either right away or the next day. To protect yourself from this creature, basically you don't open the door, don't answer during the night, or when the person dies, you cut off the head from the body or cremate the body. Since this legend isn't truly about vampires, I'll just leave it as a bat. It doesn't quite fit, since the Vrikolakas isn't a bat, but you get the idea. It's close enough. And now let's talk about Zé Vampiro, who is the Brazilian vampire from Monica's gang. And even though he's a vampire, and really in the classic style, right? He turns into a bat, lives in a cemetery, talks to the undead. He's not really scary, right? He's much more comical. So, compared to the others here, because for me, okay, in my opinion, a vampire has to be scary. I don't buy into the idea that a vampire has to be charming or funny. No, he has to be scary and suck blood, okay? Not suck anything else. That's why I'm leaving Zé Vampiro down there as a bat, though I respect and care for him. Well, now moving on to the Dhampirs, which is a legend from the Balkans. Basically the union, right, of a vampire with a human woman. From that comes the Dhampir, who inherits all the strong abilities of the vampire without their weaknesses, meaning he can walk during the day. He's kind of an ancestor of Blade, or Alucard. I'm not sure if Alucard from Helsing walks in the sunlight, but anyway. According to legends, Dhampirs usually don't have bones and also don't have nails. They were hired by villagers from old villages to get rid of vampires. He's the balance between vampires and humans. I think this legend is really cool and awesome. Vladimir from Lowell is a really strange case because he looks a lot like one. He's inspired by it, but he's not a vampire. Because his own lore says that he wouldn't be a vampire, right? In the usual sense of the word. Because like Vladimir is a master of hemomancy, which is blood magic. He lives in the region of Noxus and is actually one of the founding members of the Black Rose. He tries to manipulate everything from the shadows. At least in the lore I knew, right? Vladimir would be a human who learned dark arts from the Watchers, who were masters there, beings who controlled the world before their downfall. He also ended up killing his masters and using their magic to become immortal, living through the ages of Noxus and also gaining more power, mainly through the aristocracy. Vladimir sees both his life and his blood-draining rituals as art. It's basically an aesthetic spectacle for him. Well, since Vladimir isn't exactly a vampire, even though he seems like one, smells like one, and no, not tastes like one, that would be weird. Even though he seems like one, he's not a vampire. He'll stay as a little bat, though I think Vladimir's idea is cool. Now let's discuss the Corpo Seco, a Brazilian vampire legend. According to legend, this person was very evil in life, refused to share wealth or food, and even hit their mother. And then when he died, neither heaven nor hell wanted him. He was left wandering here in the world. And then, of course, his body started to react. He began to lose weight, became extremely skinny, lost his skin, and turned into an extremely ugly creature. He became so skinny that he used it to his advantage to get to his victims. He uses his extremely skinny form to hide near trees, and when someone walks by, he attacks them and sucks their blood to try, once again, to feel alive. Something he obviously isn't anymore. Corpo Seco, I think it's awesome. The vampires from Sinners are really cool, right? They remind us a little of the old school vampires, right? They're scary, they attack at night, they're practically animals, right? Savage, hunting for their victims, looking to drink the blood that feeds them. They're practically unstoppable and very hard to kill. To sum up, I think the Sinner vampires are great, but not the best. There are better ones. Now let's talk about the Encarado, which is another Brazilian vampire, and this one is badass. This one is cool. The Encarado, first of all, has style. He dresses in a black overcoat and smells like sangria. Smells like blood. And wherever he steps, animals stop reproducing, like chickens stop laying eggs, vegetation disappears. This guy is tough. He even has that characteristic, of older vampires who have to be invited to enter the house. But he always finds a way to get in, and he always hunts those people who aren't behaving exactly well in life, and he always knows who those people are. I think this vampire is awesome. I think we can definitely put him in the top vampire category. Now let's talk about the Count of Terra Nova, the Dracula from Chapelin. As a kid, he really scared me, but now I just laugh. There isn't much else to say, right? He lives in a castle. He wants to turn a young woman into his bride, but then his plans end up being foiled by El Chapelin Colorado. And he ends up being defeated in a brilliant way by Chapelin, who simply changes the time on the clock. And when he changes the time on the clock, night turns into day, and the Count of Terra Nova ends up dying from the sunlight. Let's put him in the little bat category, but here's my honorable mention to the Count of Terra Nova. As for Dimitrescu, you might even say she's not truly a vampire. But in my opinion, she really looks like one. Because first of all, she lives in a castle. Her elegant style reminds me of the old vampires. From the old stories, from those classic novels. She does have paler skin, yes, and she feeds on blood and human flesh, which for me already makes her a vampire. It might not be in the classic sense of the word, but she is. And I really like her because when I played Resident Evil Village, I was scared out of my mind because I'm a real coward when it comes to horror games, right? And just hearing the sound of Dimitrescu's heels in the castle, I was already freaking out. So she also fits as being scary. Depending on your lifestyle, you might not fear her and could feel differently, right? The guys really went overboard with the Queen of Dreamy Teas. But anyway, I think she's not awesome. Okay, fine. No, I changed my mind. I changed my mind because I just remembered that I put Skinner in So-So, and I'm going to put her in So-So too. The Vitalas are part of Hindu mythology and are said to be creatures that inhabit cemeteries. And unlike other vampires, they need to inhabit human bodies to live in the human world. In this case, they wait for the person to die and then enter the corpse, using that person's body to walk around the world. They are also characterized as a type of vampire because they can drive people insane by kind of sucking out their sanity. But since I know that to really be a vampire you have to suck blood or at least vitality, I'll leave them as little bats. Now let's move on to Morbius, who is Spider-Man's vampire. And unlike other vampires here who have mystical or psychological origins and all that, Morbius has a scientific origin because in his case he was a very renowned scientist. He even won the Nobel Prize in chemistry, I think, something like that. But he had a blood problem, some disease. To try to cure himself, he did an experiment using vampire bats, and because of that, he ended up gaining powers related to those bats. He has super strength, he has agility, he's sensitive to light, but he wouldn't have a weakness against religious symbols, right? Or against garlic and things like that, at least as far as I've seen. And even though he's a Spider-Man villain and is actually pretty well known nowadays, he's more like a B-class or C-class Spider-Man villain, and even his universe isn't that important. Not until they made a movie about him, which made his image worse, right? I'll keep him as a little bat so he can build one. He'll stay in the little bat tier. Slavic, and was born from people who had two souls. Usually these people had physical characteristics to indicate that, like, for example, two hearts or two rows of teeth. When the first soul died, the second would reanimate the body, turning it into a monster with features of a bird of prey and sharp claws that would leave the grave at night to drink blood and devour human entrails. To prevent this attack, communities resorted to extremely brutal burial methods, like burying the body face down or ripping off the head, placing the head between the legs, and that sort of thing. And the legend also says that the person could be cured and returned to their human form only if someone managed to survive an entire night inside their sarcophagus, staying there until the rooster crowed for the third time. And I think this legend is awesome. And now let's talk about the Vampire Diaries. And I'll tell you right now, I don't think the vampires in the Vampire Diaries are any good. Not at all. I think they're too soft, they're too cute, they're not scary at all, and there's that romance stuff that I don't like, so I'll just leave them as little bats. And let's go to the Varkolac, which is a legend from Romania that also combines the legend of the werewolf with the legend of the vampire, which I've already talked about several times here on the channel. The Varkolac is born from those people who died without being baptized, and its transformation can happen during sleep, when its soul leaves the body and rises to the heavens, consuming even the stars, and it can even cause an eclipse. This creature can devour the moon. Physically, it can look like a pale being, a wolf, or even a dragon. Regardless, this creature belongs in the big vampire category. Man, for me, Twilight is on the same level as Vampire Diaries, you know? It's just a bunch of cute little vampires. They don't scare anyone. There are even vegan vampires, if I'm not mistaken, in that story, and the creatures sparkle in the sun, right? So for me, they're going in the little bat category too. The Empusa is a creature from Greek mythology, often associated with the followers of the goddess Hecate and the underworld. She is described as a female demon who is able to take on the appearance of a stunning woman to seduce travelers on deserted roads. And actually, I just realized that maybe Dimitrescu was inspired by this creature because the Impus, besides appearing as a very beautiful woman, also attacks her victims to feed on their blood and, of course, human flesh. I'll put her in the so-so category because I didn't think of Impus when I thought of vampires, right? Now let's move on to Alucard from Hellsing. Alucard is the protagonist of this anime, right? He's the most powerful vampire in the organization, which, by the way, has the same name. He serves the Hellsing family. He is the very reincarnation of Count Dracula and has an extremely absurd arsenal of abilities, including almost instant regeneration and shapeshifting, and the ability to summon the souls of everyone he has devoured over the centuries, like an army of undead servants. And, despite being technically mortal, Alucard despises his own condition and feels deep respect for humans who have the strength and willpower to face him. He fights using heavy caliber pistols, Anyway, there's not much else to say. I'll just leave the guy as a badass vampire because, come on, a vampire who uses guns is really awesome to me. Dianti. He's also different from other vampires, but he's different in one key way, at least for the purposes of this video, because he's known as the hopping vampire. Because in this case, he would be a corpse that goes around hopping since he's been dead for a long time. His limbs, his arms and legs are already stiff, so he has to move by hopping. He always tries to grab someone to suck their tea, the person's key. And one of the ways to stop this creature is to stick a paper talisman on its forehead with ritual seals written on it. He'll be pretty easy to handle too, right? Because man, if a creature like that comes at me, I'd just trip him. The thing can't even walk. Now we have Blade here, who would be a Dhampir if you think about it, right? Because according to his origin, at least the classic one, his mother was bitten by a vampire during childbirth. And because of that, he ended up being born as a Daywalker vampire. He has all the abilities of vampires without the weakness of being killed by sunlight. That made him a really badass vampire hunter. He has a sword, he has guns, he has everything. So I'm going to put him in the top vampire tier, just like Alucard with firearms. He also has a really cool sword, top vampire tier. My Lamia is another vampire from Greek mythology and actually the most tragic one, because she was one of Zeus's lovers, and he made her kill her own children. And every time she closed her eyes to rest, she saw the image of her children. Then she ended up going insane and turning into a monster, and she even got an ability from Zeus to try to help her rest a little, which was that she could take out her own eyes. But even so, she went completely insane and started hunting young people out there to feed on their blood. I'll put her in okay. Now let's move on to our Nosferatu immortalized by his movies. And he's one of the most repulsive and visceral representations of a vampire in cinema and actually in all of pop culture. Unlike the archetype we're used to seeing nowadays, where he's kind of charming, Count Orlok is an extremely ugly figure. He looks like a corpse, has pointed ears, really sharp front teeth that look like a rat's, and excessively long fingers. And he personifies disease and death, often accompanied by hordes of rats and associated with the spread of the Black Plague wherever he goes. Anyway, he's going in the big vampire tier. There's nothing else to say. Now it's about Lilith. And I'm going to say that Lilith here would be a kind of vampire, because in this case, she would be the mother of the succubus and incubus, who are demons that enter people's rooms at night to feed on their life energy. So she would be the mother of these types of spirits, and that's why I'm going to put her in the awesome tier. And now let's move on to Count Dracula, who was created by Bram Stoker in 1897 and is the most famous vampire there is. There's nothing more to say. He served as the basis for almost the entire history of modern mythology in the genre. Partially inspired by the historical figure Vlad the Impaler, he is portrayed as a centuries-old Transylvanian aristocrat who moves to England in search of new blood to expand his domain of the undead. He is confronted by Professor Abraham Van Helsing. Unlike current versions, the original Dracula has vast and varied powers, such as the ability to transform into a bat, a wolf, or mist, as well as control the weather and nocturnal animals. Although sunlight weakens him and limits his powers, it is not immediately fatal in the book. His true restrictions include the need to sleep in his homeland, and also an aversion to garlic, crucifixes, and holy water. And he can only be destroyed by decapitation, followed by a stake through the heart. There's nothing more to say. This guy here goes in the big vampire tier too. If you watch the video up to this point, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, like and share, so more people can see it, and I'll see you next time.